welcome one and all. It's time to get spicy once again with another tournament report. Kings of War is back on the menu with the Birmingham Bullrun 3. And those of you who have been following previous Kings of War reports will know that the last two Bullruns, I won the best overall crown at both of them. So can I make it 3 magnificent crowns in a row? Can I completely overburden my trophy shelf, cause it to come tumbling down onto me? That wouldn't be entirely true. I do have a little bit of trophy space left, but not much. So crowns do take up much more space than a regular trophy. It has to be said. Speaking of trophies, the first picture you'll see here are the trophies that were available at this event. Very, very nice indeed. And obviously there's some bulls there. And in addition to the usual standard tournament rules that you'll find in a tournament pack, you'll sometimes see that events have a special miniature that you can create just for the occasion to bring along that often has weird and wonderful special rules that will have some impact on the game. For this event you had a choice of 2. You could either bring the bull, or you could bring the cockerel, as I'm going to call it, just in case calling it the shortened version got this video demonetized or something. So, actually I've just realised I've forgotten to enlarge my arrow. So let's just fix that right now. Here we go, let's just jump that all the way up to size 8, there we go. So, a beautiful crown, which is... the crown itself is slightly less impressive than the previous crowns, but it does come attached to a helmet this time, which does make it very enticing indeed, and also some random prizes there. But we don't care about those, it's all about the trophies, isn't it? As we know. The wooden spoon, of course, as well, available. And there's a look at some of the other prizes on offer. So before we go into the first game, I'll go through my list. I'm still on the Nightstalkers for this event. We've got Andrej in the chat. Good evening. Anyone else who's watching this live, feel free to comment along with your input. Any questions, drop them in there. It's 1,995 points, which means that you can only take 2 of any given thing, which is very sad for me because, of course, I've been running the triple Shadow Hulk, so I can't do that at this event. However, I do have my Portal of Despair ready, so I can take 3 Titans still. And I never take 3 Mind Screeches anyway. And in fact, in this list, I'm down to 1 Mind Screech. So, the total list is as follows. A Scarecrow Regiment, a Scarecrow Horde, a Bloodworm Legion with Brew of Sharpness, giving them +1 to hit, so that's 40 attacks hitting on a 3. We've got a Reaper Troop, a Phantom Troop, a Butcher Horde, a Mind Screech, 2 Shadow Hulks, a Portal of Despair, that does not have the upgrade, so it's just the cheapest possible Portal of Despair, and all that's going to do is just give Inspiring to one of my units. Then we've got a Horror with Bane Chant, and that's the only spell the Horror has, and then 2 Dread Fiends. So, the thinking behind this list is that I want a lot of scoring units, so I've only got 1 unit in there that has no unit strength, and cannot carry tokens, for example. And we knew the scenarios beforehand. One of them is kind of a double dominate scenario where you accumulate points throughout the game based on 2 different dominate zones. So I want a lot of unit strength for that. And I think I've got a decent amount of unit strength with 21. The Bloodworms on their own bring in 5 of that, so they're a very significant source of unit strength. And then things like the Dread Fiends are a good way of just getting little bit of unit strength where you need it at any given time, and they can also act as kind of really tough chaff as well, if they need to. Okay, so moving on to my opponent's list in round 1. Now, for anyone familiar with the Kings of War scene may recognise the name as a player who is usually towards the top end of the table at events, and very high in the rankings generally. So it's a difficult start, and there's 3 rounds in this event, so if you want to actually win the whole event overall, you probably want 3 big wins, because the way the scoring system works, not only do you score, you get a couple of points for winning, but the bulk of your score is made up through how many victory points you get in the game. So a big margin of victory in the game is worth a lot more tournament points to you, and then there's a bit on the end as well for how much stuff you killed, but it's mostly about victory points within the game, which is a maximum of 7 in all these scenarios. So if you can score those 7 points, then you're well on your way to heading up the table. So let's see what I'm up against. It's orcs, and 2 regiments of Morax, a horde of Great Axe with the Staying Stone, 3 Orkling regiments, a Wardrum, Gakamak, who is quite a scary fellow, Whip the Outcast, Crudger on Winged Slasher, which is always tricky to deal with, those big flyers, and a formation, Gore Chariots. There's a couple of those, I think, and one of them is a Wardrum that's then mounted on a chariot, and that has Bane Chant. And Whip the Outcast has Heal, Hex, Lightning Bolt, and Weakness, but gains extra dice on the casting for being near regular orcs, I think, so the Morax or the Great Axe. So this is the double dominate scenario, and I can't remember what the name of the scenario is now, but hello to Billy, catching one live for once. Yeah, I've tried to put it on at the optimal time for people catching it live right now. So I can't remember the name of this scenario, but there are 2 dominate zones, here and here. And at the end of turn 3, 4 and 5, that is when you score a victory point for controlling each one of them. So potentially 6 points available in turns 3, 4 and 5. And then at the end of the game, there is another point in the middle, which is just a regular objective for you to control, not a zone. So, very interesting, scoring throughout the game, so sitting back isn't going to be very favourable, but neither of these armies want to be sitting back too much. There's not much shooting at all. So in fact, I don't think the orcs have any shooting attacks whatsoever, so I've just got a lot of stealthy that's kind of wasted. The only unit I have that is not stealthy is the Portal of Despair, which I've got here. And when I was looking at this enemy list, I thought, you know what? My stealthy is wasted, I'm probably not going to outkill them. That looks like a killier list than mine is. Only the Bloodworms are really a lethally, reliably killy unit, and that's only when I get them Bane Chanted. So the Butchers can do a bit, but it's not reliable. The Shadow Hulks can do a bit, but it's not reliable because half their attacks are based on a dice roll. So, yeah, not the most reliable killing output in my army. And in terms of board control for this one, I obviously have my Phantoms for a bit of speed. I don't really have anything else that's fast at all, particularly. The Dread Fiends speed 8, so I suppose you could count them as well, but nothing else at kind of flyer speed. But the Dread Fiends, I'm definitely going to have to use them to mitigate some of the speed of things like chariots. There's also a bit of wild charge potential on the other side for units that are nearby, I think. Is that in this army? Actually, that may be in a different list. Maybe in another army I faced. I think there's a wild charge kind of aura, so I don't think that's in this one. But there is this guy. Any big flying monsters. Kind of annoying, just going to have to try and stop them getting around the flank. And to some degree, though, if you've seen me play before, occasionally what I do is I try to just start moving as fast as I can, use terrain to shield something like that, and if it gets behind, deal with it as it comes. Just try and just delay it a little bit, but if it gets in there, deal with it then rather than letting it dictate my whole game plan. And sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. I don't have a lot of flyer defense in this army. One thing I do have is 3 Titans. So, one of the big issues with a big flyer that lands behind your lines is that they've got a really large threat range, so unless every single one of your units turns around to look at it, there's going to be flanks and rear charges all day. So one thing you can potentially do if you have your own Titan that's the same height is use that Titan to block the line of sight of the big flyer so that it can't see your other units, and put them in kind of the shadow of your big Titan so that they can't be charged. So that's why I'm not feeling too scared, because I've got 3 Titans here, so it's going to be more limited if I can use them effectively to block its view. And I've got some big, nice pieces of terrain here to guard my flanks as well. We'll see, though. So on this side, I've got all my good unit strength units. I've got the Butchers, the Scarecrow Horde, and the Bloodworms. So my game plan is to hold this one throughout the whole game. I'm not as concerned about this one, which is why I've got all my feeble unit strength units over here. I've got all the things that are worth 1, really. And then Scarecrow Regiment. And I've also got my Bull there as well. So I'll talk about what they do in a minute. On this side, I've got the Horror backing up my Bloodworms, and I've got 1 Dreadfiend, just because I want something to prevent enemy multi-charges, because that's the only way that the Bloodworms are going down, really. If they get hit by 2 units at once, then maybe they will. So, that side, I'm going to try and hold this objective for the whole game, and try and score on it in the later turns when it can actually be scored. And then this side, I'm not really hoping to score it particularly. I'm just going to use all these kind of tough to crack, high nerve, unwaverable, high defense units to hold up the enemy really, and concentrate on this side. And then if I win this fight on the left flank, at the end of the game I can then head towards the middle and try and get that as the tiebreaker. So we'll see if any of that pays off, because my opponent has got, I think that's Gakamak there. So he's very scary. There are some chariots, more axe, great axe horde, and more chariots, and there's the winged slasher. There's the enemy bull, there's my bull. So the way the bull works, once per game in the shooting phase, you can unleash it, and it just runs in a straight line until it hits the edge of the table or impassable terrain or obstacle, and every unit that it crosses, it will do D3 damage to that unit. So very effective against high defense armies, where normally you would have to actually roll the dice to damage things. This is just a straight number. So big groups of enemy units are what you want to look for, especially if they've got high defense that you would normally struggle to damage, especially if they're things that aren't going to get those wounds back. And neither side on this game particularly have a lot of healing. I've got a small amount. I've got life leech on the Bloodworms. My opponent has a small amount of healing with 1 spellcaster, but can obviously only heal 1 unit per turn. So there are the 2 zones. There's the middle objective, which doesn't come into play until right at the end of the game. And we look down my lines. Got the bull in there. I've got my 2 Shadow Hulks together, because on their own they don't do quite enough damage for my liking. And here's the enemy lines. There are various Orklings. These Orklings are represented by this Vermintide here. And more Orklings there. This isn't actually my opponent's own army. This was actually borrowed from the tournament organizer. So make of that what you will. In the first turn. Now, first turn psychology. In this scenario, if you go first, you're able to get to within striking distance of those 2 dominate zones before your opponent gets there. However, by going first, that also means that in each one of the scoring turns, your opponent is going to have the opportunity to move onto them or rejig their units between those 2 scoring areas, and you can't do anything about it. So it's kind of like the advantage of having the final turn in the game, where you can send your fast units into each control zone, for example. So you're kind of giving that up by going first. However, the reason I chose to go first is because I did want to get in the zones, and I also wanted to, if we go back, this flyer, if I go second, this flyer can put itself into a really annoying position, staring down my flank, maybe, and I don't want to have to worry about that. So I'm just going to go first, rush straight up, and then let my opponent react to me instead. And I've got these Scarecrows here, Scarecrow Regiment, just kind of guarding this flank. And I've also got Phantoms have also come over this way immediately, because I don't feel like I want to push them out into the centre. And I've got this terrain guarding the flanks of my Shadow Hulks as they push up. In the middle, I've got my Bloodworms and the Dreadfiend on a hill. So if the Dreadfiend can maybe get a charge in, coming down off the hill might be very useful there, if I need to charge in the first round. I immediately do a tiny amount of damage, which was with the Mind Screech's Lightning Bolt, I think, onto those Orklings. Just 1 point of damage there. And I haven't unleashed my bull yet. It's just kind of sitting there waiting. So that is my line. Quite a big advance. Bit of repositioning with the Phantoms. Nothing too crazy though. Turn 1 for my opponent. Staying out of charge range of the Bloodworms and the Butchers, which is obviously a good idea. Don't want to get hit by them. And other than that, it's quite a big congested advance with these Orklings in the way of the bigger, scarier Orc units. And the Winged Slasher has moved up there. I wouldn't be concerned about it charging into the front of a Shadow Hulk. That would be a really silly idea for it to do. Because as it stands, it can play a very important role in the game, distracting my units, because I don't have a big flyer of my own. I don't have breath weapons. I don't have any individuals that would want to go after it, really. So, as soon as it commits itself, suddenly that advantage is lost. So I'm pretty sure it's not going to just charge into the front of a Shadow Hulk, that it's not going to kill in one round and then it'll just get flanked by the other one. So it wouldn't be wise. Harriet's hanging out in the forest. So yeah, not much going on. What am I going to do in my next turn though? So I would still like to probably advance a little bit with some of my units. Not a huge amount, because I think most of them are currently in that zone where I can score. However, if I do nothing in this turn, I think I'll be charged by, at the very least, the chariots, Gakamak as well. Gakamak and the chariots could certainly kill a unit. And if, for instance, the chariots and Gakamak went into the butchers, then these guys could come up behind without worrying too much about the bloodworms, because they might be jammed in there and not able to get past. So there are things that could chaff up the bloodworms as well. Gakamak could be used for that. This chariot here at the back could chaff them up. So I'd ideally like to prevent too many enemy charges going off in the next round, if I can. And the way I'm going to do that is by sending one Dreadfiend into the chariots. Because if anything wants to attack the Dreadfiend, then I've got a couple of units here that would very much like to join in with that fight, if need be. The butchers have moved up and angled themselves a little bit. And they're protecting the flank of the bloodworms, of course, which we don't want anyone getting into. 4 damage onto the chariots, which is quite nice. And over here, a bit of an advance, but nothing too wild. I've got them into charge range of some of the units. I'm using my Titans to obscure my units I don't want to be charged by the big flyer, for example, the Reapers and the Mind Screech. Be a bad time if it got into any of those, because obviously anything that's moving 20 inches can't turn a complete 180 and face the opposite way. But if they charge something and kill it, then they can, of course, turn whichever way they want after combat. So if you're a big flyer and you're looking for that extra bit of rotation, then remember, killing something is a way you can get that for free. I put the other Dreadfiend into these Orcs on the hill because I don't want them charging down at anything. Look at that human hand, very blurry. A little bit of damage. And I also thought, you know what, that Dreadfiend could actually kill those Orcs because I unleashed the Bull this turn. It goes from about here, goes through the Orklings, the Morax, the Orklings, the Morax, both sets of them. It also goes through something at the back there, the Chariot. So it actually does a few points of damage to each one. I think it does 2 to every single one, which is obviously perfectly average, but still very weird. And then with the Dreadfiend going in there, with Dread as well, I thought, you know what, I could actually get something cool on them, but can't kill them. The odds obviously aren't in its favour, but it could happen since they're already damaged and there is Dread in play. And the Chariot, of course, will be losing its Thunderous Charge now because the Dreadfiend went into those ones. So there's the Bull before it gets taken away. And it's gone. So turn 2 for the Orcs. So, Orklings into the Butchers, as you'd expect to block them in. Chariot in front of the Bloodworms, as you'd expect to block them in. The Morax flank the Dreadfiend, so he's very likely to die. The other Dreadfiend gets hit by these Morax, and Gakamak joins in with that fight as well. So, I'm not wildly disappointed that I'm going to lose my 2 Dreadfiends, because I've got the enemy into attack range, and even if I'm not going to be able to kill their good stuff next turn, I can still be safe from multi-charges for the most part. Over on this side, this is where the flyer is able to position itself, so mildly sloppy I think on my part, because if we wind back a bit, let's see, so this unit here, all I had to do really was measure 20 inches and then make sure that it couldn't land behind them. Whether that means moving back a tiny bit. But I didn't bother doing that, so it is able to land in there. However, I'm not as concerned because what I'm thinking is this Mind Screech is going to be able to move to about here and then wind blast it sideways down here. And it won't be able to see the Shadow Hulks probably then. Particularly this one, which will definitely be safe. So at worst I would maybe have to turn around one of them. And I've got the Phantoms here as well that can be used to block in another unit, so I don't think I'm going to be eating any really horrible charges from this thing next turn. I think I've got the tools to nudge it and cut off its lines of sight for the time being. We've got some more Orklings into a Shadow Hulk as the Grey Tax move up. And the Bull decides it's going to go off and goes through its own unit, but also goes through some of my units as well, and does a bit of damage. And over here, Dreadfiend gets killed, of course. And the other Dreadfiend gets killed as well. So, any of those Dreadfiends clinging on to life would have been hilarious, and also would have been quite devastating to the Orc plans. However, that was not the case. So, now these chariots are positioned in such a way that I cannot charge them, because I'm in the flank with this Shadow Hulk, and there's no space for him to fit because the building is there. So the Shadow Hulk can only charge the Orklings, which I'm not too concerned about, and I'll explain why when we get to my turn 3. So, this is the situation I have presented my opponent with. First of all, I should point out that I had miscalculated, and the Mind Screech couldn't actually get far enough to get into the Winged Slasher's flank and push it sideways. So I would have only been pushing it backwards, which is actually worse for me. So after some calculations, I put this Shadow Hulk into the flank of the Orklings, this one into the front, and the Portal of Despair into the other flank. We've now got a big wall of height 6 that's totally blocking the view of the Winged Slasher, but also the one that's not facing it is now obscured from its view because its line of sight is like that. So it can only see this one that's looking right at it. So this one was able to turn around after combat, and the reason I was confident enough to do that was because I knew the chariots wouldn't be able to get it, because I've got the Portal of Despair there. So that's why the Portal of Despair went into combat as well, because then I could nudge it forward after combat, and there isn't a big enough gap for the chariot to get in here to fight this Shadow Hulk, which has to turn around to look at the Slasher. So the Slasher is doing a job of forcing me to turn one of my Shadow Hulks round, but I'm minimising what it can do next turn. The Scarecrows are just advancing up because they are in range of this scoring area. So you get a good shot of all my eyeballs on the Portal of Despair. You can also see that I've put the Phantoms into the big horde because obviously we don't want that thing coming into any of my units yet. Just buying myself a turn with them. Over on this side. Now, there is a rather unfortunate incident coming up now. So the Butchers, they do kill the Orklings, as you'd expect. The Bloodworms kill the chariot that was right in front of them. And I decided, you know what, if I turn them, then I don't like their position quite as much afterwards. Because I'm definitely getting hit by multiple units in the front. So what I think I ended up doing was... Let's see if I can get this right, because it was a very complicated setup. I can't remember exactly the angles involved here, but the reason I decided to go backwards was because I'd be in the... keep them in the front, perhaps, if I go backwards. Or maybe... Yeah, it's a very complicated situation, this one. So the Butchers, when they kill, they had the choice to rotate as well and cover this flank. And the reason they didn't is because the unit that's actually in the flank of the Bloodworms, which I think is that one, the only way they actually reach the Bloodworms is if they roll high enough on a wild charge. So yeah, they do have wild charge, I think. And if the Bloodworms had backed up 2 inches, then their flank wouldn't be available because there wouldn't be enough space to fit in there. So, as it was, I decided that was a worthwhile risk, because the bloodworms have to back up. It's only a danger if they back up 1 inch. And it's also only a danger if these orcs roll high enough on their wild charge to reach the flank. So I just need one of those 2 rolls to go in my favour, so chances are the bloodworms should be fine and they're only getting front charged. I think that is my correct assessment of the situation. However, as you can see, they haven't gone back very far because I only rolled 1. And I actually thought, you know what, I could use my tournament reroll, because once per game you could spend £5 to get a reroll of 1 dice, which goes to charity. So I thought about using that for a 2/3 chance to get a bigger number, so they'd be completely safe. But I decided I would just rely on the wild charge not rolling high enough. I also had the option to overrun the butchers after they killed, which would have completely blocked up that gap. But if I overrun the butchers, they could get flanked by this unit, which would give them up. So I chose to just rely on the wild charge failing, after failing my own withdraw move. And I'm looking at the exact setup here. I'm trying to think if there's a reason I didn't rotate the bloodworms rather than going backwards with them. I'm sure there probably is. I think maybe it puts them in range of being charged by more units, something like that. Pretty sure it wasn't just something I overlooked. So on to turn 3 for the orcs. And you can see chariots have made a hindered charge out the woods into this Shadow Hulk. The horde are obviously going to kill the phantoms. The slasher decides to make a hindered charge into the Mind Screech. That's as far away as it could get. And I was quite happy for it to be hindered charged. It would probably die anyway, but it's nothing that expensive or important. Now, as you can see, these orcs, of course, made their wild charge roll, and they go into the flank of the bloodworms. So bloodworms are going to die, and it was an unnecessary risk to take, I think. Because like I said, there were multiple ways it could have been blocked. I could have used my reroll to go backwards more. I could have just not charged the chariot. However, if I did that, then there would have been possibly more units going into the bloodworms than that. So, I knew it was a risk, of course. It's a risk where if you just play the odds that things are slightly in your favour, then you can't complain too much when it goes against you, because it was by no means a guarantee, so you can't curse your luck that much. Obviously, if they'd gone back an extra inch, there would have been no space for this unit to get in. So bloodworms will die now, which is probably game over, because I need them to hold this side, which is my entire game plan, unfortunately. I decided killing the chariot and having a 2/3 chance of being 100% safe was worth it, and sadly it did not pan out. So a bit of damage being dealt to the Shadow Hulk, but not much. Mind Screech only gets wavered, which is hilarious, so this guy's now stuck there facing that way. Phantoms get killed though, and they overrun, really eager. The Butchers take a bit of damage from Gakamak, and the Bloodworms do get killed, so lots of damage was dished out, and alas they are dead. Despite them being inspired, it wasn't enough, because look how much damage they took. A hefty amount. So, I am now no longer confident at all in this game. I've lost my one truly killer unit that could punch through one of these orc units. And yeah, obviously the odds were in my favour that they would be safe, but it still wasn't really worth the risk. So, on to turn 4. For me, the Mind Screech just moves away a little bit. Shadow Hulk countercharges the chariots and does virtually nothing. You can see it's only got 1 damage on it. I think I just rolled a lot of 2s with that one. Over here the scarecrows are just angling themselves a bit, and the horror decides to throw itself into those orcs to try and do 1 damage to stop them charging anything next turn. And the butchers countercharge Gakamak. And as we go into my opponent's turn, because obviously I did no damage, and you can see that the orcs have gone into the scarecrows. And this guy's going to charge the Mind Screech again. These orcs and Gakamak have gone into the butchers now, so they might be dead now. So suddenly it's looking quite bad here. And the Horde have gone into the Portal of Despair, which could be nasty. The chariots aren't doing much to this guy. I think that is representing... There was some kind of effect or spell cast on this guy. I think it might have been weakness, so I think that's representing weakness. So the Mind Screech is dead this time, so the Winged Slasher is able to turn round. And the Portal of Despair is killed, as you'd expect. And the Shadow Hulk still lives, as you'd expect. So it's definitely not game over, but it's looking pretty terrible. So the Butchers are killed. And the Scarecrows are almost dead, so next time they get hit they'll die. And the Horror gets killed by the Chariots. So, my opponent is now accumulating victory points, as you can see. Is now up to 4, because controlling these 2 zones for 2 turns in a row. And on to the next turn. Scarecrows going back in there but don't really do anything. Shadow Hulks are doing what they can, and we've got Scarecrows in the flank of those guys as well. So bits of damage done, but not that much, unfortunately. And that's how it's looking. So we've got the Winged Slasher that's about to hit one of these guys, probably. And the Scarecrows are going to die as well. So I said it was game over as soon as the Bloodworms died, which is accurate, because I just don't have the unit strength to claw it back after that point. So obviously, looking back, it wasn't the best decision to... In fact, you don't even have to look back, really. It was kind of obvious at the time that taking that risk, if it didn't pay off, then it would look rather silly, losing the Bloodworms to just kill a single chariot. But, like I said, 2/3 chance that they would be completely safe from that flank charge, and I would have still liked my chances on this flank with the Butchers and the Bloodworms combined. So I definitely would have been able to score some points during the game, had I not done that manoeuvre. So, in the next turn, we've got this guy steaming into the Shadow Hulk. We've got these guys and Gakamak going into this one. Scarecrows are obviously going to get killed now, and the middle is now having some units put on it, ready for the end of the game. Scarecrow's dead. Shadow Hulk not dead. Shadow Hulk double wand, which is funny. But my opponent is just accumulating points, and it's going to be maximum points. So it's just about what I can kill now. So, turn 6. Can't kill Gakamak. Double won the chariots after attacking it for the 80th time, it seems, in this game. Double won, so that kind of paid back for the double one that was on the Shadow Hulk previously. And turn 6 for my opponent. Shadow Hulk dead. Shadow Hulk dead. Scarecrows not dead. So Scarecrow Regiment survives, and that's it. But obviously I wasn't able to get any victory points. So, when you've got one unit that your whole strategy hinges on, maybe don't play the odds unless they're really heavily in your favour. 2/3 chance, probably not wise to throw their lives away based on that. In fact, it was slightly better than 2/3 because it required the Orcs to roll high on their wild charge as well. So there were 2 separate dice rolls that had to go against me, and the first one was a 2/3 chance. So, oh well. Into the next round. And I took some pictures of the armies over the lunch break, and there's mine. There's my bull. Portal of Despair. And there's a nice shot as well, so you can see a bit more of the giant carrying the Portal of Despair. And here we've got some filthy, filthy rats. We've got some Kingdoms of Men with a couple of nice giants. We've got some more Nightstalkers. I don't know what all these units are, because I did not play against this army. I'm pretty sure that's a Portal of Despair. I assume that's a Void Lurker. Those will be Scarecrows, of course, and Reapers. So these could be Bloodworms, maybe? We've got more Nightstalkers. Those are definitely going to be Bloodworms. Butchers in the middle there. That's got to be a big Gribbly Shadow Hulk. That's definitely a Mind Screech. I wonder if that is another Mind Screech. I'm going to assume it is. Yeah, so I've got a nice close-up of that one. Got some what appears to be forces of nature. Got some ogres. Got some goblins. with the display board. We've got some goblins with no display board. We have got some abyssals, it looks like. Could be more forces of nature there. We've got Basileans. And I already got a picture of that army, didn't I? Now, we've got Ratkin. Now, this one won the Favourite Army Award, and it's easy to see why. Definitely the most eye-catching concept of an army I've seen in a while, where you've got this kind of two-layered gem mine effect with all the rats living inside the mines, and then you've even got what's going on above the surface on their heads, which is quite hilarious. I haven't played against this army, nor have I used anything like this, so I don't know how practical it is to use such tall unit bases on the table. I don't know whether that causes any problems, and I don't know whether you might forget which unit's which if you're only staring at the back, which is kind of blank the whole time. So I would have to ask the player whether that's ever happened, but obviously you can see why this won people's favourite army vote. Very, very cool concept. Then we've got some more ogres. We've got some Trident Realms. More ogres. Dwarves. Very nice dwarves. Halflings. We've got more Ratkin on a slave ship. We've got undead. We've got salamanders. We've got some very, very vibrant goblins. We've got more halflings. We've got some Northern Alliance. I think that's Northern Alliance. I'm going to assume it is. And we have got Rift Forged Orcs. And some more dwarves. That's not the same dwarf army, is it? And we've got... Is this Forces of Nature? Is it elves? We've got some more abyssals by the looks of it there. And on to the next game. So, this scenario is... What's this one even called? You know what, I could just have a look. I'm going to have a look in the old tournament pack to tell you exactly what this one's called. Let me just load it up here. So, I'm sure it's got it in the pack. Is it actually in the tournament pack itself? I'm going to have a look on the Facebook group for this event now. Let's have a look. Because I could tell you the name of the first scenario as well then, which would have been a good idea at the time, to look that up beforehand. Obviously. So, let's see. It's got to be up here somewhere, hasn't it? I'm not going to spend a long time. Here we go. So, the first round was called Rack and Ruin. And the next round, which is this one you're looking at here, is called Gold Rush. So there are 7 loot counters on the table, 12 inches apart. Take it in turns to place one each. And then each one that you hold at the end of the game with one of your units, each one you're carrying, is worth a victory point. So up to a maximum of 7, of course. And my game plan here was to position 4 of the objectives all on one side, and then win the roll to pick sides, and then take that side. Which is obviously very simple, but doesn't necessarily work. And if I don't win it, then I'm just going to push through, carrying the tokens and try and get to the ones I didn't place favourably. What do we have in my opponent's army list? So, in the Rift Forged Orcs army, we've got Thunderseeker Horde with Chalice of Wrath. So I find these guys quite a fascinating unit. They're monstrous infantry, but they have 30 attacks for a horde, which is a very large number, but they only hit on 4s, pushing strength 1. So, very interesting unit. There are some fight wagons, a legion of them, 2 storm giants. There is a storm caller, Thonar, who is comparable to, let's say, Gakamak. I don't think he's as good as Gakamak, is definitely cheaper. There's a Stormbringer on Hellstrike Manticore. There's a formation, Rift-Forged Legionaries. And that is some regiments that get some kind of bonus. And Reborn Legionaries as well. So, okay, this is the Wild Charge Aura. So they have Wild Charge D3 Aura Orc only. So that's potentially very handy. So, where are the tokens, you may ask? There's one right there. There's one right there. So there's two on that flank. There is one there. There is one there. One there right in my setup. One here right in my setup, which I deploy the Bloodworms right on top of. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 right on my side, and then there's 1, 2, and where's the next one? There's one unaccounted for at the moment, so you can see very, very nice basing on these Rift-Forged Orcs. And a nice cinematic shot there. So there's one in front of my army, one in my army, one in my army, one in front of my army, one in front of the enemy, one in front of the enemy, and one in the enemy. So already I'm starting off with an advantage because I did get to pick sides. And the first thing I do is immediately run that Dread Fiend, who you can see was looking right at it. That's the whole point of his positioning. In the first turn, just run up, touch it, turn around to face the other way, he's going to run off. The other one does the same thing, and I'm just using Scarecrow Regiment there to just delay the enemy, and a Scarecrow Horde in difficult terrain to delay the enemy, and a Mind Screech to potentially push back the enemy to delay them even more. The Phantoms pick up the objective here in the middle, and they're just going to run this way with it. And the Bloodworms are going to carry an objective with them into battle, a loot objective, because they are pretty confident they'll live. So this one running away, this one running away. I've put my Portal of Despair out here, because it's quite survivable, and it doesn't need to be near my units to use its special rule. And just give something inspired anywhere on the table. So I'm using it as the roadblock in case the enemy decide to come round the back of my army. And they do have some units they can do that with. There is this big Fight Wagon Legion, and there's also the Flyer there as well. So, I am feeling quite good about this central fight. If it comes down to 3 zones to fight in, this one I've abandoned it with the objectives, and I'm just going to throw crummy Scarecrows up there to hold them up, and a Mind Screech to blast them back, and I've got terrain to shield me. I want most of the action to take place between these 2 pieces of terrain where I can't get flanked. And I like my chances with Butchers and 2 Shadow Hulks and Bloodworms and the Reapers against a Giant and a few Rift-Forged Orcs. I think that looks like a very good matchup. So, if I can tempt these guys to chase after the Dread Fiend, with the Portal of Despair to chaff them up for a bit as well, then I'm very confident I can take the middle. And I think this token should be safe because I can run away with it. I can run away with this one because I've already got my units facing the right way to keep fleeing. And yeah, so one thing I potentially could have done differently is this Dread Fiend, when he picked up the token, I could have actually had him facing that way so he could run off and hug that terrain. So that's one thing, looking back, I could have done differently. Instead of setting up to run directly away from the enemy, set up to run kind of this way. Could be a good idea, because that's what I've done with him. He's kind of set up to run diagonally towards the rest of my army. And the Phantoms are just carrying it over here. If I have to carry them and then drop them in the middle for someone else to pick up later, that's fine as well. But my opponent has got 1 token there, and this one, and the other one is about there. So if I just hold 4, then I'll be fine. Quite happy with that. So that was turn 1. Turn 1 for my opponent, you can see that quite a few of my units have got damage on them. That is because, let's go back a second. I think my opponent unleashed the bull, which is why there's just little sprinklings of damage been dealt. And then my bull was also subjected to a bit of blizzard, I think. So it did take some damage. And this is the setup that he's gone for over here. So, my slight miscalculation here. The Dread Fiend now has that token, but if I move 10 inches away, it can now be charged in the rear. Because these guys have got too close, because I just kind of mismeasured a bit. So a little bit of a mistake there, but it can be salvaged. over on the other side, I think the bloodworms maybe were wind blasted, because the enemy giants do have wind blast, which is something I overlooked in deployment, and they're not really getting in my face. And I didn't really factor in the possibility that Rift-Forged Orcs might not actually want to fight. I was thinking it was going to be a big bloodbath in the middle, forgetting, of course, that their giants have got wind blast, so really they can kind of dictate things a bit, which I lack. I've only got the Mind Screech that can do that. And these guys are moving up to threaten this Dreadfiend, but they don't have the range to scare him. Some measuring going on there with a human hand, as you can see. Lots of measuring sticks being put down to work out ranges. And staying out of charge range of all my units, of course. Turn 2, and the Dreadfiend decides, I've got a few options here. I could drop the token and run away into the corner, and the enemy would just pick it up. Or I could drop it and then stand in front of them. And I decide that's what I'm actually going to do, because I don't want them immediately charging into the Portal of Despair, which is down here. So I'm going to buy myself a little bit of time and just get in the way, be a roadblock. And then I'm going to unleash the bull through these units. And it does a few damage, not much, sadly. Everyone else is just moving up, staying out of charge range of the orcs. And I've got the horror behind the bloodworms. They're not going to get wind blasted anymore. And I've also decided at this point that the reapers should probably go this way as well. Because if the enemy do break through this side, and I'll want something killy, because they're going to hold 2 tokens on this side now. So I need to get this one, or this one. So this Dreadfiend runs away with the token, which should be secure, and the Scarecrows have just repositioned themselves a bit. I think I don't wind blast particularly well with my Mind Screech over on this side. Turn 2 for the Rift-Forged Orcs. So the Fight Wagons go into the Dreadfiend. The Manticore and these guys head up onto the objective. Actually, they're already carrying that counter, so they're just hanging out on this one, staying out of charge range of the Portal of Despair. And in the middle, they kind of back away even more, and then try and do more wind blasting with the giant. So these guys really don't want to fight. At the moment, I'm thinking, because of this side, where I should have just got away with that token immediately, but because of my miscalculation, and kind of having it angled to run into the corner rather than back into the middle, then I'm now in a position where I have to chase down a token instead of the enemy chasing me. So, bit of fail there. And it also means that this middle fight is going to be frustrating, because I'm not really going to be able to reach them without letting them charge me first. So there's going to come a point in the game where I'm just going to have to throw everything forward into their charge range and not give them a chance to not engage further. Thonar goes into the Scarecrow Regiment, so I'd be confident they would survive a turn against him. And the Dreadfiend gets killed. Scarecrows hang on, which is fine. And the Thunder Seers, is it? These guys have come down, ready to dish out some pain. Turn 3 for me. So I've hidden the Reapers behind the Portal of Despair so that this flyer can't charge them. So if they want to break through here, they're going to have to go through them. But do they really want to come through here? Because they've got 2 loot counters there, and it's going to be difficult for me to chase them. Especially if they pass them backwards and send the units that don't have them forwards. I've moved everything else up, got my butchers here to stop this guy being pushed backwards. I'm moving up, but I'm not giving them all a chance to fight, because of the speed of my units and the fact that I started off in a lot of difficult terrain means that I can't just move too far. Scarecrows decide to go after these guys because they've got Pathfinder anyway, so it wouldn't make any difference if I stayed in the difficult terrain. So I might as well get the first hit in on them. So I'm confident I'm going to end the game with some tokens, obviously, because some of them are really safe. But it's not going the way I anticipated. Into the Rift-Forged Orcs turn. So I'm confident the Scarecrows will hold out for a turn. These guys might die this turn, though. And in the middle, this giant's actually heading over this way to join in now, and they back away again. So they really don't want to fight. And these guys obviously don't need to engage, so they're just staying out of charge range of the portal and just re-angling, so these guys can pick up the other token as well. And the fight wagons turn to face this way, ready to flank. So, I'm not too concerned about that move, because I anticipated that move was coming, and I've got the phantoms at the back here that can jump in there and block them off for a turn, so that'll buy me some time as well. The next turn is when I'm going to have to go all in and get into charge range with all my units. Scarecrow Regiment dies, as expected. The Horde dies as well, which is not expected, but when you're up against 30 attacks, it's definitely possible. Just not particularly anticipated. So, 16 damage. So, hitting on 4s with 30 attacks, obviously, on average, you're not even doing that many hits. But they do get killed. It's not the most ridiculous outcome ever. It's just slightly against the odds. So, I'm not too concerned about this side though, because I've got the Mind Screech to push things away. The Dread Fiend is just already lined up to keep going this way with the token. And the Phantoms are going to drop their token in a minute and fly up there to block in the fight wagons, with any luck. And then the other token, maybe the Dread Fiend or the Mind Screech, can come and scoop that one up. So, next turn. I reposition the Reapers again so they can't be charged by the flyer. I push up the 2 Shadow Hulks into range so the enemy can hit them. And I push the Bloodworms up as far as they can go, which means that they can't be flanked by these guys, the fight wagons, because the Phantoms, when I was measuring, I found out I didn't actually have enough range to get them in the perfect spot I wanted them in yet. So I moved them further into the woods, so next turn is when they'll drop their tokens and leap out if the fight wagons haven't gone in yet. They can't charge the Bloodworms though, because the terrain's in the way. This is the maximum distance they can go and not have a flank gap that's big enough. So they could flank charge one of the Shadow Hulks, which would be a risky move and probably a terrible move, because then you won't have enough space to turn round after combat, so you get in flank charge by the Bloodworms, which is instant death, even if they're hindered. So that's definitely not going to be a move that's done, so that's kept them tied up for a turn. And I've wind blasted these guys back, I think, with the Mind Screech. Everyone else is just running away with the tokens still. You can see last turn the Butchers, I think they got wind blasted back. So, into my opponent's turn. The fight wagons do not take the bait, they do not try and flank charge a Shadow Hulk. And these guys just still aren't doing too much until the flyer decides to go and land there, which not wildly powerful, because obviously there's woods here, so it can't see everything, but it's still a bad spot for it to be in. However, I'm not overly disappointed, because there's less threats here now. This unit is now on its own, so I could start chasing it now that the fight wagons have turned away and this guy's flown off here. So if I could chase them down and kill them, I could take those tokens off them. A giant goes into this Shadow Hulk, and a giant and some of the Riftforged Orcs go into this one. And there is some decent damage dished out there, not so much here at this stage. Bloodworms taking a bit of damage as well. I think the giants have Cloak of Death, which explains how some extra damage is done. So it was the 2 units into this one, I think, which is why it's dead. And the other one is also dead. Actually, it may have just been the one. Could it have done that much damage on its own? Maybe. Yeah, so both Shadow Hulks are dead. But if I didn't throw them forward, the enemy were just going to keep backing away for the whole game, and I was just going to automatically lose. So I might as well chase them down and give myself a chance, because of the bit of a miscalculation / bad play on my part at the start over here with the Dread Fiend, which ended up giving up the token advantage. Turn 5 for me. So Bloodworms into the Frost Giant, Butchers into the other Frost Giant, and they're kind of protecting each other's flank as well, because there's no space for enemies to get into the flank of either of them because of this. And this is when the Phantoms come in and land in front of the fight wagons. And I do manage to waver this giant, which is okay, I suppose. Bloodworms don't do that much though, unfortunately. And the Phantoms are just being a nice roadblock for a turn. So, I'm moving up, ready to attack them. If they charge in there and kill the Portal of Despair, that's probably good news, because it means the Reapers can then mince them to death, hopefully. And my Dreadfiend has come this way, carrying the token, inviting the charge from the flyer. The Mind Screech is hanging out here, out of the charge range of everybody, and the token on the Phantoms was dropped in the woods. So someone's going to come and pick that up in a minute, but I had to drop it so I could fly them far enough. Turn 5 for my opponent, so that charge is taken, which is what I wanted, because it grounds the flyer now, stops it getting into the rear of any of my units, and it's one of those situations where the situation is bad, so you have to offer your opponent something worthwhile to do, otherwise it's not really worthy bait. It's like if you just throw a hook into the water, the fish isn't going to come along and just bite the hook, is it? You have to actually have something juicy dangling on there, so a loot token carrying unit is deemed sufficiently tasty for the flyer to go in. And I've got what I want, which is to stop this flyer threatening any rear attacks on any of my units, and my opponent has got what he wants, which is to chase after a token. So you have to offer something. These guys are just steaming forward as fast as they can, and it's going to be difficult to avoid them now. It would have been easier had the Scarecrow Horde lasted longer than one round of combat against them. So, now, I'm not sure if this is the right move for these Riftforged Orcs to charge into the Portal of Despair. At the moment, they were quite safe there from the Reapers. They're still safe there from the Reapers now, but if they kill it, the Reapers can suddenly hit them, and the Reapers are definitely capable of killing that damaged unit in one round and stealing both tokens off them. So I'm not sure about this move. I maybe would have been running away with these guys earlier. But on the other hand, if they don't kill him, they're safe from the Reapers for another turn anyway. And my opponent did actually say that he wasn't sure whether this was the best move to go with. So it's obviously not something that was taken lightly. Over here you can see these orcs were kind of stuck. They couldn't charge anybody because they were in the flank of both of them. So they physically couldn't reach there, so they just go backwards, which means they're in the front now, so they will be able to charge next turn. And the Bloodworms take some wounds, and the Phantoms are killed, of course, and the Dreadfiend takes a couple of wounds, but not much. Portal of Despair takes 7 wounds, but is not killed, which is almost sad. I would have liked for it to have died there, so I could get straight into those orcs. And obviously, the way that could have turned out badly, though, is if the Portal of Despair died, the Reapers go in, kill them, but the Dreadfiend had also died, and the Flyer was able to turn around and look this way, and then go in and finish off the Reapers. Because obviously they're not going to stand up to much punishment. They're a very fragile unit. So, Dreadfiend is alive, Portal of Despair is alive. Maybe I'm not so keen on him being alive. My turn 6. So I move the Reapers to the side. So if there's a turn 7, they will be able to join in this fight. And the Portal of Despair goes back in. I couldn't charge the Reapers in because the Portal of Despair couldn't get out of the way. Because if I go sideways, then I'm too close to them. And the Dreadfiend goes back in there. The Mind Screech goes to pick up the token in the woods. And the Bloodworms kill the Frost Giant. However, there is no way of having both of these units in the front. Believe me, I tried. So I angled them, and I figured out the best thing I could do is to have one of them in the flank, but make sure they're both hindered. So as it stands, they will both now be hindered. I couldn't get both of them into the front, however hard I angled them. Thonar is in a bit of a dangerous position, as are the Thunder... Is it Thunder Seers or Thunder Seekers? Either way. And then these orcs with the 2 loot counters are running away. So, it's obviously going very badly. I've killed a giant so far. And turn 6 for the enemy. So, the Mind Screech has a hindered charge on it in the woods. Thonar joins in to try and finish off the Dreadfiend. And the Bloodworms get crunched from all sides, so they're obviously going to die. Portal of Despair is under attack again. And the Butchers are under attack from this giant, who they probably should have killed by now. Bloodworm's dead. Portal of Despair dead, which is fine, because leaves this open anyway. And Dreadfiend dead, so that token transfers to them. So I'm definitely going to lose, but if there's another turn, I'll probably gain a couple of tokens to end the game with. Mind Screech dies, loses its token as well. So if there's another turn, these guys will probably take that token, take those 2 tokens, and I'm not sure which way this guy's actually facing. He might be facing that way, so they might be able to just steal it straight back off them. But in doing so, he would have to drop this token, and I don't know if these guys could make it far enough in the difficult terrain to reach that one. So if we go to another turn, worst case scenario probably is that my opponent is down 1 token compared to how it is now. However, the game ends there. So, obviously, there were things that were done foolishly in this game. I think not measuring properly or not checking the ranges on some of those units over there, so that the Dreadfiend could have easily just picked up a token and been safe. I could have put the tokens further towards the edge of the table when I was placing them, really. Although, I didn't really want to do that because then I would have had further to go if I ended up with the other side of the table. So I think the overall strategy was okay, to pick up the tokens and then head into the centre with them, where all my strong units were. However, my big punchy units that can actually fight never really got to fight where they wanted to, because the enemy were able to back away and use their Wind Blast to make it very difficult. And I had all this difficult terrain here. There was so much difficult terrain on the table that I was never able to move fast enough towards them. So that was a tricky combination of really difficult terrain to move through, being wind blasted back, and then moving up maybe the amount of inches that I lost from the wind blast, and also losing out on this loot counter on this side with the Dreadfiend due to my mismeasuring. Apart from that, learned some interesting things in that game. I haven't played against Riftforged Orcs that much, so some of their units kind of interesting. I told you I found these guys an interesting unit with their 30 attacks, which on paper they don't look that great, their stats, but when you've got that many attacks, if you roll well, you are doing a ton of damage. Whereas a unit that has, let's say, 16 attacks or 18, no matter how well you roll, there is a cap on how many damage you can do. If you roll obscenely well with 30 attacks, then, as you saw with the Scarecrows, good things can happen for you. So sometimes just having more attacks, even if your average number of attacks is lower, there is something to be said. If your average number of wounds, I should say, is lower, then having those more attacks sometimes will give you a surprising result. So, another loss, and because I didn't end up with any of the tokens, I am now on 0 points after 2 games of this tournament, which is hilarious. So, moving on to round 3. And this scenario is very straightforward, it's just invade. So, for this particular battle, I'm up against the Kingdoms of Men, and lots of pointy spears. And you can see I've gone for a very one-sided deployment here. So I've got my Scarecrow Regiment over on that side on their own. All they're doing is just there to delay the enemy. Dreadfiend and the Bull are on this side as well, because they can easily just move away from this flank. Scarecrow Horde are the only thing that I'm going to send that way, because there's a nice hedge here, so if I can defend that, then they can stop the enemy breaking through my flank and reaching the flank of all the juicy stuff that doesn't want to be flanked. All my really good stuff with all the unit strength I care about is on this side, so I'm really just sacrificing the Scarecrow's unit strength to block up the enemy from reaching my flank. There's lots of ranged attacks in the opposing army as well. I'll go through that list momentarily. So, you can see I've got quite a lot on this flank, and you'll see that my opponent does not have much on this flank. That's because there were some units positioned there, but there was also an upgrade. Have I actually got a photo of the army list here? I might not have moved it to the right spot in the video, but I can tell you what's in there anyway. There is a character on foot, I think it's this one, who has an item that allows D3 plus 1 units to be redeployed after the setup. So that means that all the units that were over here are now gone. And you can see that, from that spoiler alert, my opponent insisted on being pictured with my crown, which I took with me from the previous event. However, despite the appearance of this picture, I don't think we are going to see a Birmingham Bullrun Queen this year, because I think there were 2 ladies in attendance playing, and none of them were on the top few tables. So this is as close as they're going to get to the crown. That being last year's crown. So there are some guns, some hordes of guns. That's actually a horde of guns there, but I think there was an accident involving the unit, which also a fate that befell some of the Pegasus Knights. Have I got a picture of them? I think there's a wing missing from one of them after an accident as well. There's the bull. There's spear hordes. There's 2 spear hordes. The other one is out on this flank with the knights and the Pegasus Knights there. Pegasus Knights in the middle. 2 cannons. There's a mortar at the back as well. And there's a wizard. There is a horde of guns, and there's a small, the 2 hordes of guns there. So very scary. And small unit of crossbows, which are the only ones out on this flank, which is quite funny. And on to turn 1. So, my opponent, I believe, takes the first turn. So with invade, obviously, laying down a marker, getting into the middle of the table early is maybe a good idea. If you've got a gun line, of course, you're not going to be advancing too much. But these units are eager to advance. And I'm thinking maybe I didn't need to put these guys so far forward now. Over here, well, there's not much going on, but a lot of the guns can still shoot because they've got very long range. The only thing I have that isn't stealthy is the Portal of Despair, which means that it's going to be targeted quite a lot. And it's kind of, building such a huge, imposing Portal of Despair is kind of a psychological warfare tactic, because the thing is only 90 points, and it's the only thing that isn't stealthy. So it's got a big target on it for war machines that says, shoot at me, but it's got really high nerve, and it's only 90 points. So it's like shooting at a troop of gargoyles that are very hard to kill. So it's kind of wasted artillery shots targeting this thing, because that's the only one that isn't stealthy, and I've still got it in cover as well, so some of them will suffer a penalty for that. Some artillery ignores that type of cover. There is some shooting dished out onto the butchers. They take a bit of damage. Portal of Despair takes quite a lot, but it's not dead yet. And on to the next turn, my turn. So, Scarecrows heading for this hedge where they're going to dig in and defend. These Scarecrows are feeling a bit vulnerable. In the middle, I've just advanced up towards all these guns. I've got my Dread Fiend here, ready to either, if I can get an angle on it, maybe charge one of the cannons. If not, I can block up this unit with him, because I'm just going to be advancing up. I am learning, of course, when I'm using this army, because I have no flyer defense and no speed defense on the flanks, really. So, unless I specifically use both Dread Fiends for that role, but they're only 2, and they're only small. Don't have a lot of attacks, so they're not much of a threat. So what I've done here is I've just deployed all the way up to the edge, ignored that half the table, so it's really far away, and then put something that's going to be hard to shift with the hedge in the way to keep this flank force away from me, and denying flanks at every opportunity. The Bloodworms are consistently getting killed by flank charges because they're so large and unwieldy that they do give them up sometimes. So it's basically just an advance for me. Turn 2 for my opponent, Knights into the Scarecrows. The Spearman Horde on the hill heading this way. And it's invade, so these 2 units together are unit strength 7 in total, I think. But I'm not planning to kill them. I'm just happy for them to be in my half, because I'm going to get everything else into the enemy half, and hopefully it won't die. More damage on the Butchers. Damage plinked on by various shooting attacks. Portal of Despair is getting up there, but survives. Scarecrows are dead. So, flank defense force 1 is gone. So, Scarecrow's going to have to get towards that hedge ASAP. And that's my whole turn again. So, just advancing again. I'm going to be able to do some charges next turn unless all the guns run away. And I don't think they can run far enough to escape the Dread Fiend anyway. I've got my Reapers behind the Butchers, because otherwise they'd just get shredded with gunfire. And we've got Maggers in the chat there. Hello. I've noticed there's quite a few people watching this live who haven't liked the video yet, which quite frankly is a disgrace. So let me know if you're watching live, so I know who's in there, and if you've got any thoughts on my list or anything up to this point. So, Scarecrows, heading up to the hedge. They're staying out of charge range of the Knights for now, and charge range of these guys. So, they're not going to be able to hit me next turn. So I'm just buying time with the Scarecrows, don't want to rush into charge range. The Dreadfiend has gone into the woods. So if these guys decide to charge the Dreadfiend in the woods, they'll be hindered, so they probably wouldn't kill him, because he's got a good nerve. And they'd be really out of position then. The Phantoms charge into the Gun Horde, which covers my advance. So the Portal of Despair and the Shadow Hulks can move up. On this flank, the Dreadfiend goes into the Horde of Guns. The Butchers kill off the small unit of crossbows that they were able to reach, and then they turn to face the Horde, so next time they can join in with that. The Shadow Hulks, we've got one heading that way, we've got one heading into the centre. So I'm planning to just sweep the flank with these two, or maybe these three units. And the amount of unit strength I'm carrying into the enemy half now is significant. And the main killing power in the enemy force, there's Pegasus Knights at the back there, but I'm making sure I'm not giving them any easy targets, nothing juicy for them to get their teeth into. They're not going to be able to hit, for example, my Reapers. And on this side, the two powerful units, the Spear Horde and the Knights, are going to be dealing with Scarecrows for a while. And I've got my Mind Screech here as well, so if I need to Wind Blast them away. Turn 3. So, Pegasus Knights from back here flank charge the Phantoms along with the guns in the front. The other ones are just hanging out at the back. The Knights and the Spearmen are just positioning themselves ready for next time. So when I saw this positioning I thought, if my Scarecrows shuffle a bit to the side, I think I could deny a double charge next turn. Because of the angle of this building, there's not enough space for this Horde to hit them and slide down far enough to allow the Knights in. So yeah, that's what I'm leaning towards at the moment, and also anyone that does charge is going to be going over this hedge probably. So, I'm quite confident about that. Let's see, who just got killed? Oh, the Portal of Despair finally got shot off. Should have died last turn, really. And the Bloodworms, you can see the damage is not much on these units, because they do have very high nerve, and the War Machines haven't been hitting them very often because of the stealthy. Dreadfiend with the Gun Horde, he gets wavered, which is mildly annoying because it limits which units can fit in there to fight them now. He's in the way. And the Phantoms obviously get killed, and the Pegasus Knights turn round. So they are actually providing a nice block, so I can't get to the Gun Horde with the Bloodworms now, so I'm going to have to charge the Pegasus Knights. Okay, so I'm still feeling confident, but it's quite a solid little bunker. So I'm hoping to bust through it now. So turn 3. Scarecrows move sideways, so there isn't enough space for the Horde to fit in there, slide it down far enough, and leave space for the Knights to go in. So they're not going to be able to double charge me. So the Scarecrows doing their job of holding up, and anything that does charge them, of course, gets hindered by this hedge. Magus says, which game are you on? I'm on the final game, which is game 3 right now. And I won't spoil what happened in case you decide you're going to go back and watch those 2 other games first. So I'll give you a minute or 2 before I reference the previous games at all. So, the Dreadfiend has gone into this Horde, because I need them blocked in so they can't come in and flank my Bloodworms. The Shadow Hulk and the Butchers finish off this Gun Horde. The Dreadfiend couldn't join in, of course, because it was wavered. Bloodworms kill the Pegasus Knights, and the Shadow Hulk is just waiting menacingly. And the Dreadfiend does a bit of damage there, but really it's just a roadblock. And I'm very happy about how this is looking, because Pegasus Knights do have some options they could charge into. But I've got these 3 units that are all menacingly looking into this line of guns now. So I'm quite pleased with that. And then this side, I've got these 2 units successfully held up, hopefully. Turn 4 for the Kingdoms of Men. So, the hero on Pegasus spots an opening and charges into the Horror, which I did leave open, not necessarily intentionally, but I'm not that concerned if the horror gets killed. I'm really about protecting my unit strength. You can see the bloodworms were life leeching some of their wounds back as well, which is a good feature they have. If you're just chipping damage away at them, they're going to get those wounds back as soon as they get into combat. So the knights decide they're going to ignore the scarecrows, and the spearmen decide they're going to make a hindered charge into them. And I have positioned perfectly, if I may say so that when the horde charged me, the corner of them stays in the hedge, which means that they're going to be hindered, and then as long as I don't want to fight them back, I can repeatedly make them hindered for the rest of the game. So you can see a human hand reaching across the table, and all the guns, they both fired their grape shot into the bloodworms, but only did 2 damage in total because you're hitting on 6s, so it's going to be tricky. And the horror doesn't take much damage. The Dreadfiend does better than expected and only gets wavered in this combat, which is great because they're tied up for an extra turn now. And I've got more time to sweep through everything else. And these Pegasus Knights decide, you know what, we're not just going to fly in and hit one of your units and get killed the next turn. We're going to fly over the top, reserve our unit strength, and maybe just fly off into my half and score, which is a viable strategy. Scarecrows take a bit of damage, not enough. Now, if the Knights were facing the flank of the Scarecrows at this point, I would be concerned that the Scarecrows would die next turn. However, I don't know if that's a big deal anyway, because the Scarecrows aren't scoring because they're still in my half, so killing them isn't really a factor. They're just there as a roadblock. So, I haven't lost much yet. Turn 4 for me. So, what's gone on here? Well, the Bloodworms and the Dreadfiend are in this spot. Okay, I can actually wind back and tell you what happened exactly. So, you can see this hero, this wizard. What happened is, the Dreadfiend and the Butchers double charged that little wizard, which then led to the overrun, and the Butchers then overran into the mortar and killed that, and then overran even further. The Bloodworms killed off the horde on its own, so I did that combat first, which then made space for the Butchers to overrun into the mortar, so I was able to kill the wizard, the horde, and the mortar in one go. So very devastating, just 1 cannon left. And the Reapers turn around to face those Pegasus Knights just to get rid of any ideas of them maybe turning around to threaten the rear of my units. Shadow Hulk facing that way in case they decide to go there. So really I'm just chasing them, so their best option is to run away and not participate in the game and just score, which I'm fine with because I'm still going to win anyway. And the Mind Screech did a bit of damage and killed off that cannon finally, because I've been plinking away at it with lightning bolts throughout the game and finally killed it. Dreadfiend obviously couldn't do anything because it was wavered, and Scarecrows did nothing because they want the enemy to be hindered when they charge me again next turn. So, I've got lots of unit strength in the enemy half. There's lots of enemy unit strength in my half as well, but not as much. I would probably have to lose either the Butchers or the Bloodworms for it to be a significant amount to stop me winning. So, turn 5, Kingdoms of Men. The Knights just repositioning. I don't think they're going to be too eager to get out of my half and fight though, unless they could kill a really expensive high unit strength unit like the Bloodworms. Pegasus Knights head into my half as well to score, and Bloodworms take a bit of damage from the cannon. The Dreadfiend gets killed, and because of this guy's positioning, who is a mighty hero by the way, then that means I'm not going to be able to charge those guys with the Bloodworms next turn, which is mildly annoying. Scarecrows take more damage, but they're still hanging on. So, still looking fine. All I have to do is avoid the Bloodworms and the Butchers being killed. If one of those dies, suddenly it's looking dicey, so I have to keep them alive at all costs. Turn 5 for me. Scarecrow's going to do nothing again and just get hindered charged next turn. Everyone else is just spreading out so they're safe and can't be killed and keeping their unit strength intact. The Mind Screech charges off into the enemy half as well. The Dreadfiend, I think, kills the cannon and overruns to there. I think it killed it combined with the Bloodworms because I wanted them to get their life leech to get wounds back. The Butchers are staying in a safe position because they're a bit more vulnerable. They could possibly die if they get charged by that horde, which of course we don't want. And the Shadow Hulk is just positioning to support. Turn 6 for the Kingdoms of Men. So, these guys decide, this horde, decide they're going to charge the flank of the Dread Fiend, who is already wounded. They are hindered, but they'll probably kill it anyway. But if they don't, they get flanked and die. Even if they do kill it, they probably die from this double charge anyway. Now, if you were in this position, would you make a hindered charge into the Bloodworms, knowing that you have to get their nerve of 28 to remove them, and you're going to be hindered? I think probably you're not going to kill them. So getting rid of that unit, scoring some more kill points, probably not a bad choice. So it's definitely a double charge coming here in the next turn. Probably. And the Scarecrows finally get killed. So these 3 units are in my half unopposed. Their total unit strength is 9. How much do I have in the opposing half at the moment? I've got 5, 8, 9, 10, 11. And if the Mind Screech goes in there as well, I've got 12. So it's definitely looking good unless I throw away these units or the game continues and I don't protect myself. So turn 6 for me. Kill that horde with the Bloodworms, who then life leech back some wounds and turn to face the enemy, and the Butchers do the work there as well. I decide that I'm going to send this Shadow Hulk out of the enemy half, out of the scoring area, because if there's a turn 7, I don't want the Bloodworms being charged, because that's the only way I'm not going to win this game. If these Knights charged, they would be losing their unit strength, of course, for scoring, but if they kill the Bloodworms, then it wouldn't really matter. It would still possibly make it into a draw, maybe, which would be bad. So the Shadow Hulk, I'm giving up 1 unit strength just to go and sit in front of them to make sure they can't charge the Bloodworms. And that means it's going to be a guaranteed win for me, really. I don't think there's any way of that changing. And here's me posing with the last year's crown, because obviously I didn't win the crown this time. You can see that this game ended, by the way, at the end of turn 6. There was no turn 7, so that's how it ends. So my opponent has got 9 unit strength in my half. I've got 5, 8, 9, 10, 11 in her half. So there you go, 11-9 win. The game plan worked pretty much. The Scarecrow Horde were able to stop this fighting force from impacting the game at all, even though I've allowed them to score. That was okay because I was advancing with so much unit strength into an enemy territory anyway. If a couple of things had gone south, and some of my units had been killed maybe, then I may have had to reassess and start hunting things down, but as it stood, I had enough alive and I didn't really need to worry. So, with my crown, I did offer to the organiser, I said, if you would like me to present the crown onto the new ruler's head, the new king or queen, whoever it may be, then I am prepared to do so. Even if it leads to a chant of the king is dead, long live the king/queen, whoever wins. And I then did present the new crown onto the new ruler's head. And have I got a picture of that lined up in here as well? Where is it? Well, I have to crack this open separately. Let's see if this happens. There we go. So, the aftermath of me placing the crown onto the new king's head, I was then looking very solemn and, of course, very sad. No longer the Birmingham Bullrun best overall champion. The 3 in a row did not happen, but it was pretty obvious that was the case after a couple of turns in round 1, to be honest. So, I didn't finish last, based on that last game. Did manage to pick up a good number of points there to jump up the table a little bit. And that's the end of the tournament. So, let's see. Owen says there needs to be a Kings of War tournament eventually. A tournament purely between Kings of War players that own crowns from events. I would be down for that happening. I don't know how many crowns have been issued during the history of Kings of War tournaments, but anyone that owns a crown, make it known, and I'll see if we can arrange an event sometime where you have to wear your crown all the way throughout the event. That would be fun. So, Nightstalkers. I've got thoughts on Nightstalkers. I don't feel like I've been competitive, or I haven't felt like my lists have been competitive since the Soul Flayers dropped to speed 8. I feel like the last time I was able to like command the table at all was at the last Bullrun, when I took the 4 regiments at speed 10, because you can just control the whole table, and unless your opponent has some good way of dealing with it, then it's very tricky for them. And I think at the moment my army lacks board control, but it also lacks killing power. You really want to have at least one of those, and if you can have both, then great. But if you lack both of them, then you're going to struggle. Only really the Bloodworms kill reliably, and it's not that easy to get them in combat without getting them killed. Because you do tend to leave them exposed sometimes if you're really desperate to get them into combat, and if you hold off, you're just kind of wasting all those points that you've spent on them. And it's just one big unwieldy unit that the enemy can easily chaff up and avoid, because nothing else that hits them they have to be that worried about. Shadow Hulks, not reliable damage. Butchers, not reliable damage. Reapers also got nerfed a bit, so they're not as reliable killing machines as they used to be. So overall, I think my model collection doesn't make the most competitive lists. Maybe it's partly to do with my playstyle as well. Maybe I'm just not that great with the Nightstalkers. But I am going to paint some more units for them and bring them back out at some point. But for the time being, I'm going to wheel out some of the other armies, because I've got about 5 or 6 Kings of War armies. There's no point just using the same one over and over again endlessly. So I think next time it might be Abyssal Dwarves, or maybe I could be tempted to get the Goblins out again at some point. There's also Undead and my Undead Halflings as well, who maybe could get some play. So let me know what you would like to see, because I've got a couple of tournaments coming up in the next few weeks for Kings of War. I just signed up for one this weekend, and then there's another one, I think, 2 or 3 weeks after that. There's a Dead Zone event between those. So 2 Kings of War events coming up. They're both around 2,000 points. So Abyssal Dwarves, I've been tinkering with a list that fits in my 3 Golem Hordes that I own now. So that would be fun to try them out. I haven't done that yet. Or I could just tinker with some other lists, see if I can come up with something different. But for the time being, Nightstalkers going away for now. They will be back out because they're too cool not to be. And even the models themselves, I thought the Giants are so cool it encouraged me to build them into an Age of Sigmar Giants army as well. So they're going to be slotted into their round bases and get some Age of Sigmar action as well, so those models aren't going to be neglected. If I'm going to spend all this time sculpting eyeballs, then I'm going to use them, damn it. So, don't forget to like this video. The one thing I will tell you to check out at the end of this video, by the way, currently there is a Bad Squiddo Kickstarter running for Women of Horror, which has got some very nice miniatures in it. They're not all women, by the way. One of them is the Turkey Man, who has to be seen to be believed. There are also vampire guinea pigs, which I'm definitely going to be including in my personal pledge. So it's called My Last Sunrise 2 Women of Horror. So go and have a look at that on Kickstarter, and you should probably back that immediately for all the Bad Squiddo goodness. Much of Bad Squiddo goodness represented in my Nightstalker army, by the way. My entire Bloodworm Legion, most of that is Bad Squiddo miniatures. I use all the Bad Squiddo basing stuff for my Nightstalkers, lots of tentacles. So top notch, top quality Bad Squiddo action on Kickstarter now. And Owen says, I was going to say, you spent ages on those minis, then you're going to shelf them would be a huge shame. Yes. That's why I've got this kind of dual purpose plan for them, and that's why I felt justified in making all these giants. Because obviously, you don't want to be penned into using the same units in your army over and over and over again. So if I found that my Nightstalker lists worked a lot better without as many Shadow Hulks, or without any Shadow Hulks, I would feel very guilty if I'd spent so long on all those eyeballs and then never used them. So the fact that I've got that backup plan of using them for Age of Sigmar as well means that I'll be less compelled to take them if I don't feel like the list is doing very well, and I can try out other lists without worrying about those models just gathering dust and going to waste on a shelf somewhere. Also, the Bullrun is the last event for a while where there's an overall prize, meaning that painting score is also included in the overall prize. So, that's one less reason to just go all out and take the coolest possible looking army that I can make from my collection. I can lean a bit more into taking units that are actually powerful in the game rather than just units that I've made that look cool. So we'll see whether that changes my fortunes, but like I said, I don't feel like I've been that competitive with the Nightstalkers outside of the one time that I took loads of Soul Flayers just before they got nerfed, because I just wanted to see how it was. But some people had taken more than 4 regiments, and I thought, you know what, they're about to get nerfed, I might as well have one good go with them and see what happens, and that's when I won the last crown. So, since then, I haven't felt like they've really performed that well. Anyway, next up on the channel, another Kings of War report next weekend. After that, Dead Zone, which I'm probably going to take the Forge Fathers to. After that, there is more Kings of War. I think the next Age of Sigmar event I've got penciled in at the moment is the beginning of May, but we'll see if anything else pops up in the meantime. And the calendar for the rest of the year, there's 1 or 2 events each month generally, mostly Kings of War and Age of Sigmar. So if anyone knows of any more Dead Zone, there is actually a Dreadball tournament that popped up, but it's on a day that I can't make it, unfortunately. That would have been nice, because I do like a bit of Dreadball, so hopefully there's more of that in the future as well. And I don't know when the next Andy and Rem episode is going to be. It depends on the Remster, really, because he's busy with his various musical projects. So don't forget to like the video, don't forget to check out all the links in the description, including all the social media, the various Twitter, Facebook. There's the Discord server as well you can join. And don't forget, of course, if you want to keep this lighthouse, this beacon of light during these dark, turbulent, foggy times, if you want to keep that glowing bright so all this red hot, spicy, tender, succulent, delicious, moist, finger-licking good content can be delivered straight to your taste buds, then why not pledge your life savings on the Patreon as well? What else are you going to do with it, really? And with that, all that remains to be said is, good night out there, whatever you are.